What's up, you guys? Welcome back to my channel. At this point, my house has simply just been taken over by cats and kittens, which I'm having to learn to cope with. It's not the worst thing in the world, but I'm just hoping they stay napping and not parkouring themselves off of the cat tree. So today we're going to be talking about another case that is very local to me, another case actually out of Asheboro, North Carolina. I honestly believe that this case should have been solved and could be solved very easily. It was featured in either 2018 or 2019 in Breaking Homicide, where Derek Levasseur ended up uncovering a ton of information that I'm kind of shocked had not been uncovered until he came in and asked some very simple questions. So I'm a little bit shocked that it's not progressed any further. Search to try to see if there's been any current movement in the case since the Breaking Homicide episode went live, but there has not been. And so I wanted to make sure some pressure was still put on there and this young woman's face was still put out there so that hopefully her family can get some answers. All of the different interviews with this young woman's mother, Tammy, have been heartbreaking, watching her plead for the truth and plead for answers after so many years have passed. So I'll be speaking about the unsolved murder of 16-year-old Judy Rawlings on October 4th into October 5th, 2001. So everyone that described Judy said she was just a really chill young woman. She was very kind. She was a good girl. She was the clown of the bunch, always making sure everybody laughed. She was always sweet. She was always very, very happy. But unfortunately, she was also very trusting. And this could unfortunately be what led to what happened to Judy the night of her death. Judy was 16 years old at the time. She was in high school trying to have fun. She would hang out with her friends a lot. And unfortunately, according to her mother, Tammy, she was kind of hanging out with a group of people that she didn't approve of, including their two neighbor brothers, Tony and David Sierra. But unfortunately, on the night of her disappearance and murder, this was the group of people that Judy was with. On the morning of October 4th, 2001, Tammy and Judy were going about their day. From my understanding, Tammy was battling cancer, so she packed up early that morning to head off to Greensboro, which is the closest large town, to see one of her doctors. And I believe at this point, Judy was getting herself ready for school that day. Now, when Tammy got home later on in the day, she was expecting Judy to be there. However, Judy's grandmother and Tammy's mom was at the home and informed Tammy that she had given Judy permission to go off four-wheeling with none other than Tony Sierra, the neighbor that Tammy wanted Judy to have nothing to do with. According to Tammy, this was not something that Judy had ever done before. I guess it was very normal and well known to the locals that both Tony and David Sierra would four-wheel pretty much all the time into all hours of the night, but Judy usually was not allowed to do so. Over the next couple of hours, Judy never came home from this four-wheel ride with Tony Sierra. And the following morning, when Tammy woke up and Judy was not in her bed, had not gone off to school, she went ahead and reported Judy as missing to the Asheboro Police Department. Obviously, the first place that police looked was at Tony Sierra because he was the last person that Judy was known to be with. And from what they gathered, they believed he had a rock-solid alibi and a rock-solid story. According to Tony Sierra, he did in fact go four-wheeling with Judy the night of the 4th of October, but he claimed that the last time he saw her, she was alive and well. Tony Sierra claimed that Judy asked to be dropped off at Farlow Oil Company, which is a gas station, and it appears to also be a car shop, about 2.5 miles away from where Judy lived. And he said that he dropped her off at around 11:30 p.m. that night. According to Tony, Judy claimed that she was meeting someone at this gas station. He said that he never saw her with anybody, he simply dropped her off and left. Tony Sierra claimed that after he dropped Judy off at the gas station at 11:30, he was home by midnight. He also claimed that both his mother and father were home, and so this gave him an alibi of sorts. However, there's a lot of holes already in that story. First and foremost, no one knew what had happened to Judy at this point, so anything could have happened in that time period that he claimed to have been with her. There was really no way to prove if she actually went to meet someone at this gas station. And to top it off, the gas station closed at 9 p.m., hours before Judy was dropped off there, meaning lights were off, no one was there, and there wasn't a single witness to corroborate the story that Tony ever dropped her off. But his story was somewhat accepted. I don't believe his family was ever questioned to confirm his alibi either, so this was kind of left as a loose end. Now, when police went to speak to Tammy about this to figure out if maybe there was anyone at all that Judy may have wanted to meet that night, they're trying to identify this mystery person. Judy's family right off the bat said none of this story sounded right. If there was one thing that they knew about Judy for a fact, it was that she was absolutely terrified of the dark. So first of all, the idea that she was even out willingly four-wheeling late at night in the middle of the dark woods did not sound right. Even more so, the fact that Tony claimed he dropped her off at this gas station by herself at night and left her alone there also did not sound like anything Judy would be okay with or ask to do. One of Judy's friends that she had been with that day, Stephanie Hinchman, also came forward with information that made the story sound even more questionable. According to Stephanie, she had been with Judy that day after school. She also lived relatively close by, and I guess they were hanging out at Stephanie's house, and at some point, both the Sierra brothers drove up on their ATVs and asked Judy to go riding with them. Not Stephanie and Judy, just Judy. According to Stephanie, Judy told them absolutely not, and for some reason, the Sierra brothers got incredibly mad at Judy for this. Stephanie said Judy appeared very scared when both the brothers got angry with her, to the point where she actually asked Stephanie if she could spend the night at her house. Clearly, she didn't want to go home where she lived right beside these brothers because of how uncomfortable they made her. Stephanie had to tell her that her mom wasn't going to allow a sleepover on a school night, but she said she would absolutely walk Judy home herself to make sure that nothing happened to her. And that's exactly what happened at around 6:30 to 7 p.m. that night. So between 6:30 and 7, Stephanie walked Judy home, and sure enough, when they got to Judy's driveway, which was a shared driveway with the Sierra family, both brothers were still sitting there on their ATVs. Judy again appeared to get really nervous about this, so Stephanie asked her, do you want me to walk you up to your door to make sure you get inside safe? But Judy kind of shrugged it off, said, no, I can manage from here. I'll just stand here and talk with them for a little bit, and then I will go home. Later that night, when Stephanie was at home at around 11:30 p.m., when Tony Sierra claims he dropped Judy off at the gas station, Stephanie remembers hearing four-wheelers driving by her house, and she says that she immediately knew this had to be the Sierra brothers because they were the only ones really in the area that were out driving into all hours of the night. This introduces another questionable piece of information. The Sierra brothers clearly wanted Judy to really badly go on this four-wheeler ride with them, to the point that they got angry at her when she said no. The fact that Judy didn't even want to go home that night and wanted to stay with Stephanie in order to avoid being near the Sierra brothers, to me, is very, very telling. And then to know that somehow after all of that and how nervous she was, she then went on a four-wheeler ride, allegedly willingly, with Tony Sierra seems a little bit off to me. On top of that, in my opinion, it also throws into question this idea that Judy had planned to go meet someone at the gas station that night. If she had plans at all to meet with someone that night at that gas station, why would she have asked to stay the night at Stephanie's house? That just doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. Then on October 19th, Tammy's absolute worst nightmare happened. Authorities arrived at her home to let her know that remains had been found that day only a mile away from Farlow Oil Company, and they strongly believed that these remains belonged to Judy. Obviously, they still had to do some sort of DNA testing to the remains. According to authorities, hunters had been in the woods that day, and they smelled something that they claimed, and I quote, was consistent with death. So they followed the scent, and it led them to a purse. When these two hunters picked up the purse and looked inside, there was identification inside of it saying that the purse belonged to Judy Rawlings. Knowing that Judy was missing, these hunters immediately stopped and called police, and police arrived to see if there was anything else around the area, including remains. Sure enough, just about 100 yards away from this purse that had been found, they did in fact find the remains of what they believed to be Judy Rawlings. Right off the bat, they knew they were dealing with a homicide. Judy was found clothed only from the waist up. Her pants and her underwear were found unbuttoned and very clearly taken off of her purposely near her body. Authorities did not believe that this was something that was kind of like ripped off of her in some sort of accident. It was more indicative of a sexual assault. Her left arm was above her head, and I believe on her left arm also there was a strap tied to it. Her right arm was underneath of her body as if she had been dragged. And probably the most telling that this was a homicide was that someone tried to conceal Judy's body. There were twigs and branches broken off of a nearby tree that had been used to attempt to cover up Judy so that no one would see her. Her body, after all, was found quite literally just off of the ATV trails that ran back in this area. The remains did end up being positively identified as belonging to Judy, but unfortunately at this point, she had spent 17 days out in the middle of the woods. And early October in North Carolina, especially in this area, you're still experiencing very warm weather. And so her body was deteriorating very rapidly at this point, and also animals had managed to find it. So the medical examiner was not able to get a ton of information from the body. They did attempt to do a sexual assault kit, but unfortunately that was unsuccessful as well. They also were not able to determine the cause of death. They were only kind of able to speculate based off of where there was a lot of insect activity on the body. Even then, it didn't give them a lot of information. Authorities spent a lot of time in the woods searching this entire area, looking for any other bits of evidence that they could possibly find, hoping to be able to use that if this case ever went to trial. Police did execute a search warrant on Tony Sierra in November of 2001 to collect blood, saliva, and hair samples from Tony to compare it to evidence that was in fact found on Judy's body, but I have not seen if anything at all came from this. Authorities knew that whatever happened to Judy and whoever did this to her was someone that was local. First and foremost, coming from a North Carolinian, Asheboro is a place that you live at because you grew up there. Like, you were born and raised there. That's not necessarily a place you would purposely move to. It's not a place that you vacation to. The largest thing to do in Asheboro, North Carolina is go to the zoo. So it didn't make sense for this to have been done by someone that did not live there and did not know the area like the back of their hand. Authorities had promised Tammy that they would have this case solved within a year, but here we are in 2022 and still no charges have ever been pressed. In my understanding, this case bounced around to multiple different lead investigators. I don't necessarily believe that authorities didn't do everything they could. I just believe that this police department, being where it is in a town like it is, I don't believe they had the resources they really needed to investigate a homicide like this properly. When Derek came in and started poking around and asking questions, he uncovered a lot that kind of just made me want to throw my head through a wall, because it's information that should have been found by lead investigators looking into the case, and I just don't understand how it remained uncovered up until the point that he looked into everything. Wyatt Farlow was one of the men that discovered Judy Rawlings' body, and I'm sure that sounds somewhat familiar because Farlow is the name of the gas station that Judy allegedly met someone at. So this kind of threw into question to police and obviously the locals that maybe Wyatt was the person that she was going to meet that night. I'm not exactly sure what their age difference was. I believe that his grandfather or father was running the gas station at the time, but according to some locals, Wyatt would frequently hang out at the gas station after hours and bring people there to drink. However, when confronted about this, he stated that that's not something that he ever did. So I'm not sure how likely it would be that Wyatt was actually at the gas station that night. But a lot of people thought it was odd that he just so happened to be the one that found the body. According to Wyatt, it was not abnormal for him to be hunting in this location. The body was found right off of Groom Road, which I said is about a mile away from the gas station. But a lot of people still threw into speculation that he was possibly involved somehow, because not only did he find the body, not only was it his gas station that she was last seen at, but also just after the body was found, Wyatt for some reason went back to where he found the body and also found one of Judy's shoes, only 50 yards away from where her body was found. Also, according to authorities, they searched this area heavily for things like one of Judy's shoes or any of her other belongings, because they obviously wanted all of the evidence they could possibly gather. According to them, they took rakes to this entire area. They got all of the leaves up. They thoroughly searched. So a lot of people found it very hard to believe that this man that found the purse, found the body, now goes back after police allegedly thoroughly searched and also finds one of her shoes. But Wyatt maintains his innocence. I will say, when he was questioned by Derek Levasseur on the show, he did seem to be a bit nervous. Derek said that he seemed a bit evasive. However, that could just be chalked up to he was nervous. This is kind of a small town murder that's been a part of his whole entire life at this point. So maybe it's just that, or he has more information than he's letting on. But probably the largest thing to me that Derek Levasseur found was something that absolutely shattered the already very weak weak alibi that Tony Sierra gave. So Tony claimed that he didn't do anything to her, and he could prove that by saying he was home at midnight that night and his mom and dad witnessed it. Now, Derek reached out, tried to speak to Tony, couldn't get to him. Tony's mother did want to speak. She said that this whole entire situation had ruined her son's life and that she knew for a fact that her boys were not at all involved in whatever happened to Judy Rawlings the night of October 4th, 2001. But when questions started being asked about that particular night and about Tony's alibi, she admitted that she wasn't even home that night. According to Tony's mother, she was working the third shift. She did see Tony earlier that day. She even saw Tony speaking to Judy earlier that day, but she wasn't ever home to witness Tony come home that night. And according to her, her husband was also likely in bed sleeping. So there is literally no one to corroborate this idea that Tony got home at midnight. So not a single bit of Tony's story can be corroborated at all. I honestly don't know if his parents were just never questioned to corroborate the story or if maybe they changed their story later on down the line. But either way, I feel like the alibi was already incredibly weak. I already felt like so many questions should have been asked just because he was the last known to be with her. At this point, we know that there's no one to corroborate that Tony went to the gas station and dropped Judy off. There's also nobody to corroborate that he came back home at around midnight that night and never came back. And we also know that one of the other last individuals to be with Judy that day, her friend Stephanie, claims that Tony Sierra got very angry and mad along with his brother at Judy for not leaving to go four-wheeling with them, to the point where Judy felt so uncomfortable and upset she didn't even want to go home that night. So to me, I feel like this is just one gigantic red flag, and I'm in disbelief that somehow no evidence was found at all to connect any of this together. More information ended up coming out in 2018 and 19 that honestly could have dramatically changed what happened in this case and should have been brought forward to lead investigators right away, but for some reason it just wasn't. A man named Michael Turner was in a holding cell with Tony Sierra in either 2002 or 2003, which I will get into why Tony was in a holding cell after this. But this man, Michael Turner, came forward in 2003 saying that he had information on the murder of Judy Rawlings. So while Michael was in this holding cell with Tony, Tony started claiming that he knew things about the murder of Judy Rawlings and that he was a part of it. Tony told Michael that he had consensual sex with Judy that night. According to Michael, Tony made it seem like they were there together with a couple of guys four-wheeling that night, so it wasn't just Tony and Judy, but other individuals were present. He said that Tony mentioned something about a gas station, brought up this consensual sex. According to what Tony said, after this, Judy freaked out. Michael claims that Tony said at this point he freaked out because he did not want to be accused of sexual assault, despite the fact that he said it was completely consensual. They tied a rope around Judy's neck and proceeded to drag her behind the four-wheeler. He claims at this point Tony said that he hid Judy's body. This is absolutely massive. This man, Michael Turner, came forward with this information in 2003. At this point, police had released absolutely no information on the murder of Judy Rawlings. Also, according to the medical examiner, there was a lot of insect activity at Judy's neck and in between her shoulders, which again, they weren't able to identify a cause of death or anything like that, but that insect activity was indicative of a lot of severe trauma to that area, which matches up with this idea that she was potentially pulled behind a four-wheeler by her neck. We also know that she had a strap around her wrist. I'm wondering if maybe she wasn't pulled by her neck, but instead her arm. That still would have affected her neck and shoulders the exact same way. Now, for some reason, this information was never handed along to any of the lead detectives in Judy's case, and that could have changed everything. A lot of the times when inmates come forward with information like this on a case, it can be complete crap. However, this man had absolutely nothing he could leverage for this information he passed over. He was actually, I believe, completely out of jail at the time he came forward with this interview and information. He didn't have any pending charges, and the day that Tony told him all all this information was the day he was actually going to be released from jail. So this man had absolutely nothing to gain from having this information other than simply wanting to get it off of his chest and aid in an investigation. So the chances that this man was lying to get something from it are pretty much slim to none. Investigators said that the only way this man could have had that information at the time in 2003 was if he either was there himself, which was not likely because he wasn't even from the area, or B, he got it straight from the mouth of someone who was. And he was told this information by Tony Sierra. Now, what was Tony Sierra in jail for at the time, you ask? Well, according to Greensboro.com, an article from October 30th, 2002, it says right here, deputies arrested Tony Ray Sierra Jr. at age 18 from his home and charged him with first-degree rape of a child. Apparently, it was indecent liberties with a child and incest, and this apparently happened May 22nd, 2001. He was held in Randolph County Jail under a $250,000 bond. Now, I have not seen what the result was of that trial. I don't know if there was ever a conviction. It's been really difficult to find any information on that, but that is a pretty huge deal. And not just that, he even has other charges from 2020, so he has gone on to continue assaulting people, and I believe he may even still be in jail awaiting trial for this. Tony was again arrested on July 13th, 2020. It says here in this article, he's charged with felony statutory rape of a child by an adult and 2 counts of felony statutory sex offense with a child by an adult. And he was being held in Randolph County Detention Center at $2.5 million bail. So we've got 2 different offenses already where he has sexually assaulted a child. And the last person that Judy Rawlings was with this man. And she was found, believed to have been sexually assaulted and then killed. At this point, they have Tony Sierra's DNA, so if there ever is anything they can test it against with advancements in technology, there's no telling if there will eventually be charges filed against him in connection with the murder of Judy Rawlings. But it is just absolutely wild to me how solvable this seems. I honestly feel like, again, I think authorities did their absolute best. I just don't know if they were equipped to handle this type of homicide. And her remains had also been out in the woods for an extended period of time. They deteriorated a ton, and clearly a lot of evidence was unfortunately missed. After all, we have this shoe that was found. I know a lot of people have claimed it was possibly planted after the fact. However, I've also seen in an interview that Tammy, Judy's mom, has gone out to the location that Judy's body was found, and she herself even found one of her daughter's bones there. So clearly, everything was not retrieved from this crime scene. And so that just leaves me to question if there will ever be enough evidence to push forward in this case. I was honestly expecting to see some sort of movement in the case after Breaking Homicide looked into it and brought forward all of this information. However, if there's just not all of that initial evidence and information, then I just don't know what it's going to take for them to proceed with charges in this particular case. Possibly a confession, maybe other individuals can come forward. There is a possibility based on a witness came forward saying when Tony Sierra was talking about Judy while he was in this holding cell that other individuals were there. So I just really hope that if there are other individuals out there keeping quiet, they're seeing the cost of their actions and what it is doing to Judy's family, and also what Tony has gone on to do to other individuals because he may have never been captured for a crime he committed back in 2001. But that is all that I have for you guys today. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to listen to Judy's story and supporting her family, and hopefully we will have some sort of answers in the future and her family can have some bit of peace and Judy can get justice. If you haven't already, go ahead and hit the subscribe button down below to become a part of the Helen fam so that we can hopefully bring them home together, and I will see you in my next video. Bye.